So I like what you're saying here, that that if you wanna put if you wanna end your inquiry into the nature of our lives, into the ultimate meaning of our incarnation here as creatures in the cosmos, that maybe the best answer that we can come to this, why does the world exist, is that it's here for its own entertainment. And actually, I'm going to get into that a little bit on Sunday in a shorter talk that actually has an end to it, an end time. Not to freak you all out with apocalyptic predictions, but Sunday from 4 to 5 I'll be here speaking on entertainment as social action. There are a lot of people that would agree with you. I mean, the Hindus, talked about the emanation of what, the Christians would have called the Godhead, the materialization of divine essence into a world of form as Leela, as play, and there's, the kind of one of the biggest questions to these like stodgy, head on stick Western rational scientists is why do we play? They don't, these people that are totally divorced from the intelligence of the body and nature at large look at, dogs and baby elephants and all these other creatures, and they're like, well, if evolution is about doing things in the most efficient possible fashion, then why are they goofing around? I mean, this is the guy who, I'm forgetting his name right now, but the guy who invented graham crackers, believed that by eating bland food, we could keep children from masturbating. And actually he was the one that advocated circumcision in the United States as an anti-masturbatory measure. This is the reason that half of the children at this festival grew up with, their parts mutilated at birth. Because we came out of a culture that doesn't understand or value the importance of play. I mean, I'm someone who does not like to put an ultimate cap on things, but that's because I consider the universe what game theorists call an infinite game. And this is another thing that Douglas Rushkoff talks about in Present Shock, as part of this total paradigm shift between the way that we used to see things and the way that we see things now. It used to be that the most interesting games for us were the games that had a finite set of conditions, clearly defined, prescribed rules, and ended with a victor and a loser. But if you look at most of the games that have been coming out recently, these massive online multiplayer games, augmented reality exploratory enterprises. My favorite card game in the world, Flux, which has victory conditions but is ultimately inscrutable, and it doesn't really have a clear goal. The goal is constantly changing. It's basically the Tao Te Ching in the form of a card game. All of these games are games that are played simply for the enjoyment of playing them. And so the only reason that I'm hesitant to agree with you that the ultimate meaning of life is to play, to enjoy it, is because that would kind of end the conversation, wouldn't it? And where's the fun in that? I mean, the truth of the matter is that, you can, from this sort of this paradigm of evolutionary psychology, say that play, like dreaming, is a matter of rehearsal. That it's about testing new conditions and exploring new situations as a way of preparing for the potential but not necessarily defined or restricted situations that a being may stumble across in the course of their life. That puppies tend to play fight. Boys, this is, one of the, Kohlberg and Gilligan, these people, they studied developmental psychology with relationship to, gender studies. Carol Gilligan gave, little boys dolls and little girls' guns, and or like army soldiers, and the girls would play house with the army soldiers, and the boys would take the dolls and be like, play fight, because we have these innate tendencies to play in ways that have been, shaped by the racial and psychological evolutionary histories, that there is a sense in which play is a means to an end, that play is not simply an end unto itself. However, it seems that we're, if you look at Dixon up there, Dixon and I, as musicians, we're very happy people. Why is that? It's because in our music we're constantly exploring this, this space that 50 to 70 years ago, was understood as like jazz or free jazz. It was this this channeling of the musical libido, and the constant improvisational exploration of a space that is not is not predefined, is not prescribed and delivered to us. So I see this this movement towards improvisation on a cultural level. For example, Rushkoff talks about the movement from team sports with clearly defined victory conditions to extreme sports where people are just sort of engaging with their environments, and skateboarding or snowboarding, or the squirrel suit, these things where you're looking at a landscape and you're saying, oh gosh, how could I relate to that? How could I engage that in a novel way? And this gets back to the architecture of the human brain. If you look at our evolutionary history, time and time again, we have solved the evolutionary problems presented to us, the selection pressures of our environment, by choosing, I use this in a kind of a narrative, mythological, and anthropomorphic sense, but the solution has been, time and time again, to arrive at deeper and more intricately embedded forms of society. The more intricate our society, the more intelligent each of us have to be in order to live in society, because it's an increasingly complex cultural landscape. This is what in the biological sciences they call a cultural trap hypothesis. The more complex the environment, the more complex the intellect required in order to navigate the environment. But then that creates a more complex set of relevant communications. The more you need to know more words, more ideas, in order to make it, to navigate that environment, which leads to a more complex world space. And so we're in this kind of runaway evolutionary chain reaction in which smarter people are leading to a more complicated world, or leading to, smarter beings that are creating a more complicated world. And in order to navigate this world, we have to continue to learn well into our adulthood. The human brain is defined by its plasticity. Old dogs can't learn new tricks, but old people can. Our brains do not concretize and congeal in the same way as most of the other animals' brains do. And so, in order to achieve this, our brains retain a youthful state. That basically we remain playful into old age. And now, maybe Dixon and I are not the best examples because we're both Capricorns, and Capricorns are known for our bizarre, anachronistic, paradoxical, elderly youthfulness. To be an old man in youth, and to be young and sprightly in our old age. But in that sense, I do think that I'm kind of a representative of the evolutionary trajectory of the human species, in that I'm a goof and an improviser, and that I'm fascinated by novelty. And that as our world accelerates, and as the landscape of our world becomes ever more turbulent, ever more creative, ever more disruptive, ever more novel, that it requires more and more novel, playful, creative people within it. And so, let's telescope this out a few thousand years. What do you get? You get a race of divine, childlike, godlike, hyper-connected, telepathic, large-eyed, small-mouthed, masters of anti-gravity and free energy who communicate through feeling and light and music and have radiated throughout the cosmos to explore time and space, which to me sounds more or less like our alien encounters. And in fact, the people who've come forward in these whistleblower testimonies, like Dan Burrish with Project Camelot, says that what the aliens told him was that they were actually human beings from the future that had traveled back in time in order to observe this extraordinary moment, this turning point, this inflection point in the history of our species, where we woke up to this new identity, as the age of Aquarius, if you want to get astrological about it, is about the self in service to the community, the self defined by community. And ultimately, I guess, to put a bow on it, to drop a cherry on top of this ridiculous philosophical Sunday, I found my way out of the maze of the confusion of the pandemonium of postmodern overflow by realizing that you could dance your way out of the maze. That if you just wiggled, if you just, as Elvis communicated to me from beyond the grave, if you just shake well, if you just allow I don't know how many of you have seen, are familiar with cymatics, where they drop all the sand on the head of a speaker, and then as they adjust the vibration, the frequency of the speaker, the sand, the nodes of the sound bouncing off the perimeter of the speaker, they lead to these interference patterns where the sound waves cancel each other out, and it creates these beautiful mandala patterns in the speaker. And the higher you turn that frequency, the more points these waves cancel each other out, and so you see the same pattern kind of dissolve and then reconfigure at a higher level of harmonic. That it's like those, when you're drawing a fractal diagram and you draw the triangle and then you draw the extra little triangle on each one and then you draw the extra little triangle on each one of these. You can see this in sound. You can actually see this in the visualization of these internodal points where the sound has destructive interference and cancels itself out. And I think that we're going through something right now in that same way. Like, a lot of us are concerned about the way that externalizing our memory into the electronic space is creating a race of amnesiacs. And that's certainly true, but I mean, to me, I think it's more that it's not so much that we're shaking the Etch-a-Sketch as it is that we are bouncing around on some cosmic cymatic plate, and that we'll all reconfigure at this higher and more crystalline level of order, vibrating at a subtler and more exquisite, delicious frequency. So, I mean, in that sense, nothing has really changed except our relationship to it and to one another. So I'm totally with you, I guess, on the fact that play is what it's all about. I mean, Ken Wilber was asked at one point, why the universe, Ken? And he said, it's no fun eating dinner alone. You can't play a game of chess with yourself. I guess Aquinas and Augustine got into a debate about this. Which is the more unlimited God? The God that can limit itself, or the God that can't? Of course, the God that can, right? The God that's capable of being both infinite and finite is the greater being. And so it's, if you want to look at it from a point of view of physics, it's the entropic inevitability. Evolution is the process of the river running down the mountain in the most expedient fashion. It's the most efficient way to make a universe, is to have something and nothing. Nothing doesn't go anywhere. That's why, trying to meditate in order to escape the world of suffering is ultimately a dead-end game. It's a finite game. And the Buddhists figured this out 2,000 years ago. They figured out that's you're still missing the point. If you're becoming enlightened in order to escape your suffering, then you're still not actually identified with the entire world. You failed to recognize that nirvana is samsara. Samsara is nirvana. And so, rather than getting off the wheel, which the Theravadan Buddhists, that was their whole thing. The Mahayana Buddhists, they're all like, okay, so you attain enlightenment, and that's like step one. And then the next step is waking up the rest of yourself. It's an endless game. You can never finish this game. The really scary thing is not death, but acknowledging that you are infinite and that you aren't going to die and that you're going to continue to come back forever and ever and ever with a deeper and richer and fuller and more impassioned, more profound grasp of the suffering that you have chosen for yourself in order to play this game. The tension required in order to create a world of form. That answers the question of why God, why? Because it's fun. And, that's you got to be careful telling that to somebody who just, lost their wife. But it's true.
And I feel like the suffering can be, as we get deeper and deeper understanding, we can bounce off of the suffering much, much faster. Understanding that it is the springboard to more greater fun, deeper fun. So we're not, it makes sense to me when I thought, well, if I'm infinite, if I'm God, God is all it is, whatever you want to call it. Why would I want to be on this physical kind of reality? Because anything else makes sense, but have fun, play, and have those patterns get richer and more intricate and more beautiful. The beauty's in there too. That's what's amazing. It's not the most efficient. The river, it's the beauty. Look at what you've created. It's not for efficiency only.
Well, it is also the most efficient path. Bucky Fuller had his whole thing about tensegrity, about how there are compressive forces and there are expansive forces in everything, and that a fractal boundary, the way that a river winds downhill, is actually the best way for those two forces, the tension and the contraction and the expansion forces in water, that it's the best way for the energy to dissipate through the system. That if a river were to run in a straight line, it would spill over itself, and it would end up leading to that exact serpentine pattern. So, this is, like lightning, as woolly and nonlinear as it looks, the straightest, the quickest distance between 2 points is not a straight line. It is some kind of fractal. Because that's what dissipates the energy best through the system. And that's, Edward Wiley at the University of Kansas, one of my advisors, he wrote a book called Evolution as Entropy. And he co-authored this book, and it was all about that, about how all of this emergent order, everything that we're seeing ramping up, is also the best way for the universe to ramp down, as long as you're looking at it within a closed system. I don't think he ever really got outside of that box, literally or figuratively. Still working in the museum. God bless him. I'm not the only voice here. Who else wants to weigh in on this? Who hasn't gotten the newsletter? Can we throw that clipboard back into the audience there? And
yes, might be a little off topic, but I was reading something about...
Nothing is off topic.
It was like there's a neuroscientist who is studying, I think it was the cytoskeleton, which is, the stabilizing structure of the cells, which is usually, in science classes, it's always taught that all that does is stabilize things and maybe help with motion. But I guess some new research is suggesting that because the cytoskeleton is so small, it's way smaller than the nerves or neurons or anything like that, that it's in a size scale where it could feasibly be interacting with the quantum physical realms more easily, and that potentially things like intuition and ESP could be a result of actually cytoskeleton like being like a conduit through which stuff can, transfer into whether the quantum realm and like go past the speed of light and all that, and then go into cytoskeleton through the nerves and something like that.
Yeah.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, there's Penrose and Hameroff's concept, their attempt to find the mechanical basis for consciousness, and they're saying that what we've understood to be the skeletal structure within a cell has these pockets in the structure that are small enough, like you were saying, for quantum processes to occur, and that for example, I mean, they're looking at studies of anesthesia and how we don't really know still how anesthesia works. How the brain continues to function, but the light of conscious awareness just shuts off. And they think that it may be that there's some sort of non-local, self-referential quantum entanglement occurring between these little pockets, that the cell is operating, each cell is operating on these pockets, making measurements, and that's what leads to consciousness. I have an issue with this only because, I mean, not to say that isn't relevant, that the cells are not, we know that biological systems manipulate quantum phenomena. We've looked at this in smell. It turns out that our sense of smell is in some way a quantum event, that photosynthesis finds the most effective pathway for electrons through the photosynthetic chain, through examining all possible outcomes simultaneously, and then the most efficient one just occurs. John Joe McFadden at the University of Surrey in England wrote a book called Quantum Evolution, in which he suggested that this is how life on Earth occurred instantaneously, which it did, apparently, emerged just out of the ether without any kind of like patient recombination, trial and error process. That if you're dealing with quantum phase space, that you can examine all possible outcomes simultaneously, and the one that leads to a self-reproducing molecule is the one that's going to collapse the wave function, because it's the one that interacts with the rest of the world. And so, given the right chemical soup, that bam, life occurs. It just happens because it measures itself. It does the Baron von Munchausen thing and pulls itself out of nothing by its own bootstraps. And that maybe this is what consciousness is as well, that it's something emerging out of nothing. But I don't really know enough to agree or disagree, and I'm careful about this stuff because we don't want to reduce an experience to a description, or a description to an experience. I mean, these are obviously valid and complementary perspectives on something. So even as we come upon, a deeper and more penetrating understanding of the processes that lead to reflexive self-awareness, it doesn't mean that we've arrived at some final understanding of consciousness and what consciousness is, because consciousness cannot be reduced to a description. And in some sense, consciousness and mind are different things. Mind, interiority experience, and matter, body, description are things that occur within this greater field we might as well call consciousness. So consciousness would be like the solution within which all of this is occurring. Like the clear light.
When you think about taking, what's your opinion or your words on taking all of the cells and everything that encodes our consciousness and our inner soul, and taking it away from this planet, and what are your thoughts there? what benefit that would bring.
Why should we leave Earth?
Maybe, yeah, right there.
Play. I think that leaving Earth because it's the only way that we will survive is like tragically misguided, because there's no way to create the ecological systems that support life beyond this planet without understanding the ecological systems that support life on this planet. And so the very thing that will allow us to create seed ships that travel out into the cosmos is what will grant us the same wisdom and the same capacity to survive here. You know, so this notion that Stephen Hawking and all of these other scientists are like working on a secret rocket ship and that they're going to sabotage, they were just waiting for everything to go precipitously downhill. It's so wrong. Like again, the only way out is through. In that sense, the only really good reason to leave this world and to venture out into the cosmos is to play, to explore, to benefit from the exponential increase in the riches, the wealth, the knowledge, the understanding, the creative potential of our species. This is something that was really explored profoundly in fiction by Dan Simmons in the Hyperion Cantos, which if you haven't read that, I highly recommend as like perhaps the most visionary work of science fiction of all time. Dan Simmons' Hyperion. He looks at two different races of human beings that leave the Earth for two different reasons. One to explore and the other to survive. And the sort of the spiritual consequences of those two groups. I think that, taking this back to her earlier statement about the ultimate reason and purpose of things, earlier iterations of the same talk, I've discussed the alternate drive for security and the drive for novelty. The drive for something creative and fun and new versus the drive to like stay in your comfort zone where you know that it's safe and that it's okay. And these are two different chemical pathways in the brain, or can be correlated with two different chemical pathways. There's a reason that all throughout the animal world we see that animals seek intoxication, that children spin around until they fall down, that birds will eat fermented fruit, that mammals will go roam and explore. Why do they do that? I mean, why do they do that unless they have to, right? That gets back to that whole, like, well, we thought the river ran down the hill in a straight line. Why on earth is it efficient for evolution to create curiosity, daring, adventure? I'm speaking as someone with a Venus in Sagittarius, so I need to travel. I need to explore. And I need to make sense of this for myself. And I think that, what it comes down to is that we need those things in order to survive. Because if you stay in your cave all day, then you'll never find your mate. You'll never find your new resource. I mean, getting back to, my father is an advocate of citizen diplomacy. He travels all over the world for his job. And what he's found is that, he really believes that it's important not only to, promote tourism to the United States in order to heal our damaged reputation to the world abroad, to show the world that, look at us. Like, Americans, by and large, are good people, we're not really, we've let it get out from under us, we need to take responsibility for our nation again. But we're not the same kind of people that are going in there and gunning up civilians in foreign lands. We're just kind of ignorant. But on the other hand, that's exactly the problem, is that we're ignorant. And that, he also advocates that Americans get out of our comfort zones, that we go and explore, foreign cultures, and that we experience that we discover what he has discovered, which is that no matter where we go in the world, that everyone wants the same thing, which is a better world for our children than the world that we grew up in. And I think that is like as close to an evolutionary imperative as we can describe for ourselves. What Margaret Graham called divine dissatisfaction that propels us forward into the creative act. Every artist is a little bit unhappy with what they've created. Magritte said every painting starts as a romance and ends as a rape. And what he meant was, I had this great idea, but I didn't quite pull it off. So I'm going to have to try again. It's the way that the universe compels itself into this infinite game.